Losing 5 of their past 6 games, the Seahawks have looked like anything but a playoff contender. How can they get back in the mix in the NFC West and return to their winning ways? We're going to be taking a deep dive here as part of our midseason report card on Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on our Tuesday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you're listening in nearby Richland, Washington, or if you're over on the other side of the country listening from Annapolis, Maryland, we appreciate each and every one of you. The Seahawks looking to get back into the swing of things in the NFC West. And the nice thing is, after losing their 5th game in 6 outings, they now have an extra week to try to really hash things out and figure out how to turn their season around. We're going to be discussing how the Seahawks can get back into the mix, not just for a playoff spot, but in the NFC West with 8 games left to play. We've got Tell the Truth Tuesday mid-season edition, and we'll be wrapping things up with some offensive superlatives after the first 9 games, including most improved and a number of other categories. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at Game Time. Download a Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday episode of Locked On Seahawks. The Seahawks are sitting at 4-5 in last place in the NFC West. That's what happens when you lose 5 out of 6 after a 3-0 start. It has been a humbling first season so far for new coach Mike Macdonald. And based on what we've seen in recent weeks, losing 4 consecutive home games and really struggling to put everything together, a complete football game on offense, defense, and special teams, with the win in Atlanta being the only exception. This team has looked anything like a playoff team for the better part of a month and a half. And yet you and I were talking about this after yesterday's show, Rob. And I think this points to the comments that Julian Love made after the game on Sunday, losing to the Rams, that, you know, it'd be one thing if this team was playing clean football and they were outright just getting beat by other teams. Then you could say, well, the talent issue, they just don't have enough talent, and Mike Macdonald doesn't have the pieces there to win with. But they have been in every single one of these games that they have lost, and they have, just as much as the other team, they have beaten themselves. And, you know, as Walter White said on Breaking Bad, if you think that I'm in danger, I am the danger. Well, the Seahawks have been a danger to themselves on offense in particular this season, and that has kept them from being able to play to their potential. So maybe that's what makes this start all the more frustrating, is you see glimpses of the talent that this team has in all 3 phases, and they haven't been able to put it together. And so that's why I still, after this 5 out of 6 losing skid that they're on, I still have some optimism that the Seahawks can find a way to right the ship, but it's got to start immediately coming out of this bye week, and they've got to stop hurting themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of putting it, Corbin, because I think that the Seahawks are a team that has talent, and they are a team that shows flashes. There's a reason to be optimistic. It's not like they're getting boat race. This is not a team that is lacking talent at the most important positions. They're just lacking any type of consistency when their offensive line does block, and it does happen. When they do block well, then those are some of the times the times when either Zach Charbonnet or Kenneth Walker III or Geno Smith makes mistakes on their own. You know, when the defense is starting to play a little bit tougher against the run, then that's when, you know, maybe at the nickel cornerback spot, they get beat by these slot receivers like we talked about with Khalil Shakir from Buffalo or Amon St. Brown with the Detroit Lions. So to me, that is one of the things that is most maddening about the Seahawks in 2024, but at the same time, also very encouraging. And I specifically wanted to mention just the possibility that the Seahawks could get a jolt after their bye week, because they're very likely to have Abraham Lucas and DK Metcalf back on the field for them. Certainly DK Metcalf. And, you know, again, I think that DK Metcalf, or you can say what you will about his own inconsistencies, there is just no doubt about the fact that when number 14 14 is on the football field, then defenses have to account for him. If Abraham Lucas is back on the field for the Seahawks, again, I think that is going to help solve some of the issues that they've had at the right tackle position. And I do think that it would help the play at right guard and at center as well, just knowing that you have a player who's a little bit more physical and a little bit more consistent at that right tackle position. And I also mentioned the possibility of Uchenna Nwosu getting back on the field. I think you can make a strong argument, Corbin, that those are arguably Seattle's three most important players, with the exception, of course, of Geno Smith, the quarterback. And if you get those three players back and the physicality with which each of those three players bring to the table for the Seahawks, then you could get yourself on a little bit of a late run here. And so to me, that is the optimistic part where you have to hang your hat at this point, because there's no question about it. The Seahawks have dug themselves into quite the hole at this point, but it does feel like they have the players to be able to dig themselves right back out of this problem.
Yeah, that hole that they have dug themselves into, and we talked about this, why this was a must-win game against the Rams, and I'm sticking with what I said going into the game, and losing this one, that it felt like the Rams just kept gift wrapping, like, take it, we want you to win this game, and the Seahawks were not able to take advantage of it. It's extremely frustrating, but they are 1-4 against conference opponents. They are 0-2 in the NFC West, so that is an incredible hole to dig out of. At the same time, they're still just one game out of first place in the NFC West. If they could somehow start playing more complete complementary football on offense and defense, if they could cut down on these penalties, just one or two less a game, they might have won 2 or 3 of these games that they lost. Those penalties have been huge. You add in those factors, if they are able to clean things up, even in spite of the fact that that offensive line has been so bad, there have been moments where that line has played just good enough that the skill position players are able to rise up and make something happen. We've seen Geno Smith lead the league in passing yardage this year. We have seen the run game have moments. The problem is there isn't any consistency there. But there's a lot of ifs, but you're only one game out. You have been in all these games, even the Bills game that they ended up losing by 21 and ended up getting ran out of their own building in the second half. They had chances to go into halftime with the lead, and that might be a much different game. They have been competitive in these games. They just can't get out of their own way. And so that's the biggest key. Can you play with better discipline? Can you stop making these self-inflicted mistakes that have been costing you so many winnable football games? And if they are able to do that, that's the biggest if to me. If they are able to do that, the defense is showing signs of playing better. You mentioned some of the players that could be back in the lineup that instantly make this a better football team. Those are trade deadline acquisitions without having to give up anybody. Getting DK Metcalf, Abraham Lucas back, Uchenna Nwosu potentially later in the season. Those are additions that would be a huge boost to this football team, but they have got to stop hurting themselves. And if they are able to do that, then this division is still very much within reach. And if you're looking for another positive, they've still got 4 games against NFC West foes, and most of them are coming up right now. They're going to have 2 games against the Cardinals, and they get the 49ers after the bye on the road. So you have a chance, if you can win 2 or even all 3 of those games, that you can suddenly flip the script, and you've got a winning record in the NFC West. Your NFC record looks a lot better. You could be in first place at that point because these teams are so jumbled together with a couple of 4-4 teams. You've got a 5-4 team, and the Seahawks 4-5. There is a very plausible way for this team to get right back into it. I mean, it's not like they're out of the mix anyway, but they've got to find a way to start playing some winning football, which we just haven't seen the last month and a half.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think is going to make this second half of the season fascinating for Seahawks fans. We know that in the past, Pete Carroll had developed a reputation for the Seahawks playing better as the season went on. Now, of course, at the very end of the last couple of seasons, that was not the case, and that's why he no longer is the head coach. This is going to be quite the opportunity for Mike McDonald and his coaching staff. I was critical of Brian Grubb and Scott Huff, especially and their adjustment from the college game to the NFL in yesterday's show and in previous spots. I think that this is going to be a time to evaluate the players, but frankly, it's going to be a time to evaluate the coaches as well. If the training isn't happening, if players are not improving, then John Schneider is general manager, and of course he has more power than anybody other than the owner, of course, and Jody Allen, that he is going to have to start feeling some heat, and maybe he is going to be pushing for some changes, because clearly the Seahawks are playing pretty stagnant, pretty ugly football right now. And you mentioned that DK Metcalf and Abe Lucas and then possibly Uchenna Nwosu, that's going to feel like trade acquisitions without giving anything up. Of course, the reality is the Seahawks did give up some things to make some trades here. John Schneider was expecting for this team to be competitive. He wouldn't have been making those trades for Roy Robertson Harris and, of course, for Ernest Jones if he did not believe that this was a team that's going to be competing for the playoffs. So the pressure is on. I am fascinated to see what happens after the bye week and see if the Seahawks are able to play better football. It certainly has to be improved football moving forward. Whether it actually results in wins or losses, that's a whole different conversation. But there definitely has to be improvement. Otherwise, there could be some people moving out of Seattle here, and it may not all be on the player personnel side.
When we return, we are going to dish out our Tell the Truth Tuesday takes. It's a mid-season edition. There may be some commentary about the Rams game, but maybe more of a big picture perspective where the Seahawks are at after 9 games with a 4-5 start. We'll get to that up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Game Time. You shouldn't have to think about skipping your next mortgage payment when you want to buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, and comedy near you. They offer killer last-minute deals, all-in prices. You can see views from your seat, and with their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. If you want to see the Seahawks take on the 49ers at Levi Stadium in a couple of weeks, you can currently get seats on the road in Southern California for under $50 to get a chance to see the Seahawks on the road and maybe bring some of that road noise the Seahawks have been dealing with at Lumen Field to Levi Stadium. Game Time has deals on tickets right at the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download a Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. This episode's also brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL, and you can do it all in the same place. You can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same landing page where you place your bets. You can bet on everything from Ken Walker III scoring a touchdown on the ground against the 49ers, or DK Metcalf returning with a strong performance and the first 30-plus yard reception of the game against the 49ers in Week 11. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Thanks for bringing Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. For your second listen, make sure to tune in twice a day now. Locked On NFL in the morning. Get your NFL Espresso with Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans. And then for the second show, our good friend from Locked On Jaguars, Tony Wiggins, is going to be dishing out all the NFL hot takes and insight that you are looking for, and you're not going to find anywhere else. That's Locked On NFL. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. It's Tell the Truth Tuesday. Normally, this is about rehashing the previous game, but we're going to take a step back, and it's a little bit more of a big picture. And, of course, we can apply what we learned on Sunday as well to this, but some food for thought coming out of this first half of the season for the Seahawks. And Rob, I know that there is one thing in particular that is going to bring up some medical term for some people here that you think is maybe the biggest symptom right now the Seahawks have to address with their issues that have dogged them for most of this season.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned dog them, because actually that's exactly where I'm going to go here with a term that I call the parasite factor, and I apologize because that is kind of a clumsy way of saying this. And I certainly mean no disrespect to anybody who has been impacted by any type of disease or a virus that has been spread through any type of parasites. That said, the parasite factor is something that I've often used to describe college football players, that when they make that NFL jump, then they're not as successful as they are in the pros as they were at the collegiate level, because they basically were feeding off of their teammates or their coaching staff or the level of competition in which they were playing at the collegiate level. And it's funny because, of course, the offensive coordinator, the former offensive line coach for the Huskies, Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff, are now the offensive coordinator and offensive line coach for the Seahawks. And I think that some of the difficult transition that we are seeing from Seattle's offense, whether it be at the skill position or along the offensive line, is because of that parasite factor. Everybody focuses in on Michael Penix and the three wide receivers that got drafted. They sometimes forget about the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line that was the nation's best, and the fact that the Morris Trophy Award winner Troy Fautanu at the left tackle position. Fautanu was a terrific pass blocker. He is a terrific pass blocker, but he was for the University of Washington Huskies, but he also was their best run blocker. At the right tackle position, Roger Rosengarten wound up being a second-round selection. And again, he was overlooked by a lot of folks in the build-up to the NFL draft. But again, the fact that he was a second-round selection by a team as talented as the Baltimore Ravens speaks to his ability as well. That's the thing, is that the Seahawks have not had the play along the offensive line or at their skill position, in my opinion, that I think that a lot of people were expecting. And I believe that part of that is because they had an awful lot of talent at the University of Washington, both in the coaching as well as player personnel, and it takes some time to adjust to that. But I also think that there is a possibility that all of these players, all of these coaches, including Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, is finding out that maybe each of them are being a little bit overrated, and that it was the whole team effort is why University of Washington got to the national championship game, and why so many of these players and coaches are having a tough time transitioning now they're no longer at Montlake.
And it's going to boil down to, are you going to be able to make the adjustments now that you need to, and not just lean on what made you great at the college level? That is really what dictates whether college coordinators and college coaches can really find their groove in the NFL, because it is a different game. And the defenders, especially when you're playing against them, you got to bring a really versatile, dynamic offense to be able to move the ball, because it's just a whole different level than what you face at the college game, where you can throw it 80% of the time and have success. You try to do that in the NFL, it might work for a game or two, but it is not going to be a long-term solution. Speaking of throwing the football, I'm going to catch some of our listeners a little bit off guard here, because I still maintain, I'm going to stick with this, because I still see enough big plays coming from Geno Smith with the pass protection, the lack of that he has had, that I still think Geno Smith can be your starting quarterback for the next several seasons. And if you can build around him and that offensive line, most particularly, if you can make that line better, I still think you can make a deep playoff run with Geno Smith. And maybe Sam Howell down the line can be a guy that could be your starting quarterback. But look, Sam Howell's got 1 year left in his contract after this year. Barring an injury, you're not going to have a chance to evaluate Sam Howell in a game this season, which leads to my Tell the Truth Tuesday wisdom for the day. John Schneider and company, you better be scouting those quarterbacks, because I think, we've seen over the years, they didn't draft one last year. They have not drafted a quarterback since Alex Magoo way back in 2018. John Schneider has drafted 2 quarterbacks. And Geno Smith's play, the trade for Sam Howell, they didn't need to draft one this last draft. But the further you get down the line here, Geno Smith is not a young pup at quarterback. He just turned 34. Sam Howell, again, you've got 1 year left in his contract after this year. And with Geno Smith expected to probably still be the quarterback next year, unless he gets hurt, Sam Howell's not going to get a chance to show what he can do. So drafting a quarterback, to me, is going to be crucial. And the further we get into this season and you're looking from a big picture perspective, I think drafting a quarterback is becoming more and more important. And I'm getting a little more bullish on the depth in this class at quarterback. I don't think you've got the top talent necessarily that you saw from last year's class with all those QBs, 6 of them going the first 12 picks. I don't see the star power in this group. Right now, Shedeur Sanders is probably the number 1 QB for me. And if Colorado gets to the playoff and wins the Big 12, which they very easily could do, that is going to bolster his candidacy as number 1 potential pick. But you're looking at a class that's not very top heavy, but I think there's more depth. And there's some players out there like Rourke from Indiana that aren't getting a lot of buzz, that the Hoosiers are undefeated. And the big reason they are is because of him. There are a lot of names out there for John Schneider and his scouting department to look at. And they've always paid close attention to quarterbacks, even though it hasn't translated to picking one. This year, it might translate to that because you've got to start thinking about that future. And maybe Geno Smith is that for the next 3 or 4 years. But even then, at some point, you're going to have to really prioritize finding that future quarterback.
Yeah, that's again what's going to make this all fascinating is because it was one of the surprising things to me from a draft lens is that I really thought that this last year's class was terrific at quarterback, and the Seahawks didn't select one, of course. I also thought it was terrific at offensive line, and the Seahawks did select a couple of offensive linemen, but we have not yet seen that actually result in better play along the offensive line for the Seahawks, and quite the opposite. So again, I think it is going to be fascinating to look at it from that perspective. I wanted to kind of end this real quick on one positive note. One of the things I was surprised that Mike McDonald kind of mentioned here a couple of weeks ago, as far as a positive for his team, was the kickoff and punt coverage units. And so I really was focusing on that, and they have been terrific. And we saw examples of that against the LA Rams. The Rams had 6 different times they kicked the ball deep into the end zone. So Seattle, of course, is getting the ball, in touchbacks. Seattle actually kicked the ball off to the Rams at 5 different occasions, and the Rams actually returned their kicks, and yet still Seattle had better field position. So all this talk about the kickoffs and things like that, the Seahawks actually are being very technically sound. They're being very physical on their special teams coverage, and they're creating opportunities to perhaps create a forced fumble and things of that nature. So while it does feel like the sky is falling in so many different ways, I like the special teams play. Obviously, Laviska Shenault's kickoff return for a touchdown being a big part of that. But Jason Myers has been good. The punting game has also been very, very good as well. Of course, Michael Dixon, we know that he's an all-pro caliber player. I think that is something that Seahawks fans should be able to hang their hat on at least a little bit as well.
One other thing that I think Seahawks fans should be excited about, and yes, I'm going to go into my football nerdism here. I was excited to see what's old is new. And what I mean by that, going back to this Rams game, we got to see some bare fronts and some tight fronts, things that were a staple in Pete Carroll and Ken Norton's defense when Ken Norton was the coordinator. The further we get distance, I think Ken Norton probably got a raw deal because the defense was actually decent for a number of years that he was the defensive coordinator, even with all the personnel changes. But I digress. Nonetheless, we got to see some schematic adjustments, playing to personnel and helping with the run defense. And so you got to see what Mike McDonald, Adam Durde, and company are capable of doing, making those adaptations, and having a middle linebacker that can get downhill and is instinctive certainly helps as well with Ernest Jones. But I liked that we saw some of those old wrinkles brought back, even though it's a different coaching staff, maybe different terminology, obviously, with Mike McDonald compared to Pete Carroll. But some of those things that helped them defend the run at a really high level a few years ago, bringing them back into the fold to fit some of the personnel that was here a few years ago and fits that well. So I think Mike McDonald and his coaching staff, there's plenty to be scrutinizing them about with this 4-5 start, but look, I loved the adjustments they finally were able to make schematically against the run. I think there's some long-term ramifications there that can be positive for this defense, mixing some of those looks in that we didn't see very much of early in the season. They're going to play to the strengths of this football team. So that to me is a big positive heading into the second half. They can build off what they did against the Rams, who were an average rushing team, but not a bad one necessarily. If they can build off that, particularly the 49ers, probably having Christian McCaffrey back in a couple weeks for that game, you are going to be tested. But I am really curious to see what that looks like after they made some of these revisions to their defense. Again, what's old is new on defense. It really helped them. with the run game. When we come back, we are going to have our midseason offensive superlatives, such as top rookie, most improved, and much more. That'll be coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Locked On Seahawks is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? For me, I wish I had a little bit more time to fit in some workouts to get into really good shape. The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed therapist in less than 48 hours. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try today. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be teaming up, as always, with my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We are at the midway point in the season, at least as close as you could have a midway point with a 17-game schedule. The Seahawks 4-5 after the first 9 games. Not necessarily what they were hoping for, especially after starting 3-0. But nonetheless, we are at midseason, and it's time for some superlatives on the offensive side of the football. We will knock out defense on our Wednesday show. No MVPs. This is superlatives, not awards. So let's start off with one of my favorites, the unheralded star. When you look at this Seahawks offense, who has been the unheralded star in the first 9 games?
Well, there haven't been a lot of them, but I'm going to go with Zach Charbonnet. And I think you can make an argument that as a second-round selection, that, damn it, you better be a star. But at the same time, I also think that he brings a level of physicality and just nastiness to the way that he plays. You have to tackle Zach Charbonnet. And I don't know that that has always been the case with some of the Seattle's, at least their pass catchers. And so, again, I think that considering that I think that a lot of us believe that the Seattle is absolutely loaded the skill position talent, I think that Zach Charbonnet plays an underrated role in terms of the grit factor that he brings to the Seahawks.
I'm going to go with rookie A.J. Barner for my selection for unheralded star. Now, there's been a few misses in blocking. He has not performed quite as well as I thought he was going to in that regard, but he has been near automatic when Geno Smith has been throwing the football to him. I think he's already eclipsed the number of receptions that he had at Michigan last year, partway through his rookie season. We got to see him hurdle a guy in Sunday's game, so you could see the athleticism. And I'm not going to lie, I know he's not the same player, but he wears the same jersey number. He has the same arm sleeve on. Like, I had to do a double take yesterday. I'm like, is Jimmy Graham back on the field for the Seahawks? Because he's very similarly built to Jimmy Graham. And so when he catches the football, I'm kind of like flashing back to it's 2015. And he has been a bigger focal point in the passing game than I think anybody could have anticipated. And the exciting thing is I think that there's a lot more that they can do with him because he is a pretty good athlete for his size. He's not going to be a Jimmy Graham type, but I think he's a guy that can end up making way better impact than we anticipated in the passing game. At least at this point, he's been extremely reliable. So he's my unheralded star pick. Let's look at most improved on offense. This might be a tough one too. On defense, I feel like this is going to be tough because there's a number of players we could mention. On offense, I don't know if there's a clear front runner for this award or this superlative.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to stick in the running in the backfield and go with Kenneth Walker III. And, you know, obviously the numbers do not suggest that he has been as good as he's been, frankly. The only numbers that really are demonstrating exactly what he can do is the one that we talked about in yesterday's show, Corbin, when you're describing the fact that basically he is getting 17 yards blocked for him per game. If I remember correctly, that was the number. I mean, it's staggering when you consider how many big plays that he has been able to create on his own. That said, what I really want to focus in on is what he has done as a receiver. Corbin, he already has 30 receptions so far this season. That's more than he's ever had in his first 2 seasons in the NFL. 15 of them have gone for first downs. That's twice as many as any of his previous 2 seasons. And I'm just going to skip ahead to one of my favorite things that we're going to be talking about here, and I'll shut up and give you the mic here for a couple of moments, is the best play of the first half of the season. To me, it was the body adjustment and the hand-eye coordination he showed in that catch that was critical in the Seahawks' last victory we've had to talk about, since it feels like since March, where they were able to beat the Atlanta Falcons when he was sick. To me, that catch kind of encapsulates his ability as a receiver and how important that has become to the Seahawks offense.
We've trashed the offensive line pretty much every week, and it's warranted when you look at the numbers. We have trashed the offensive line, but to me, this one's an easy selection for Charles Cross because I don't think he has developed into the Pro Bowl All-Pro caliber player fans were hoping that he was going to be becoming. But in year 3, he has made major strides, particularly in pass protection, and we've seen several games where he has been on the money, hasn't been giving up very many pressures, if any. First couple of games, he was really on one. The run blocking's been more hit and miss, but we've seen Charles Cross really put it together this season, and that's an exciting development for a positional group that otherwise has been riddled with negatives. To see Charles Cross go out there with all the different bodies that have been playing next to him and just to be able to take that step, you're hoping in the second half that he can continue to get better. If the line gets Abraham Lucas back, maybe we see him elevate his game to another level in the second half, which would be big for the Seahawks. And you mentioned the top play of the midseason. I'm staying in the same game. The throw that Geno Smith made at the end of the first half to DK Metcalf, where he threaded it between 3 defenders, could not have possibly thrown that ball more accurately or more precise. That is my play of the first half, because that shows you what Geno Smith has, and he's made a lot of throws that have been outstanding. I know there's been mistakes, but he's also had the worst pass blocking in the NFL in front of him. That throw, Charles Cross had a really nice block, so let's give him credit on that. But that throw, his ability to move around the pocket just enough to buy himself time, step up, and then make that perfect throw over the middle, to me, that speaks volumes in terms of the big plays we've seen that have been positive for Seattle. Geno Smith has been at the center of that. Okay, we've got a couple here that we're going to do together. Biggest surprise and biggest disappointment. What's been the biggest surprise on offense for you, and what's been the biggest disappointment?
Well, I was going to say AJ Barner. You kind of stole my thunder a little bit earlier when you're kind of talking about, just the end Harold Starks. I 100% agree with everything that you said. But I actually am going to have to go on the negative side here. And I was fully expecting Connor Williams to come in and have a great deal of success with the Seahawks. Now, if this was a Seahawks team of old that was going to be prioritized and getting downhill and running the football, and that was what they were looking to do, I had some questions about that, because Connor Williams has greatest success with the Miami Dolphins, and they like to throw the football around. But I really thought in the Ryan Grubbs offense that was going to be perfect. I thought that it would add a little bit of consistency to the interior of the Seahawks line. The inability to snap the ball well, the struggles with diagnosing plays, and then just getting flat out bowled over these last couple of games. To me, Connor Williams has been a negative surprise for me when it comes to my evaluation of the Seahawks and the players they have on the field.
Yeah, as far as my biggest surprise and biggest disappointment, from the surprise perspective, I'm going to go in a negative route. I've been surprised that Christian Haynes has not panned out more to this point. I'm just going to be honest, especially with the way Anthony Bradford has played. Bradford has struggled most of the season. He's had 9 penalties. He's given up 5 sacks. I think it should be more than that. PFF and I disputed on that a little bit, who's responsible for sacks in Sunday's game, but it has been a really rough go for Anthony Bradford in year 2. So I am surprised that Christian Haynes has not been able to seize that job. He got some playing time in most of the games this season, and there were some flashes where he played well, but there were also some spurts where he looked like he didn't belong on the field either. And that clearly is something that made it the Seahawks coaching staff doesn't trust him. They didn't even dress him this last game. So that has been a surprise for me, that Christian Haynes has not been able to rise to the occasion. And as far as biggest disappointment goes, there's several candidates here, and that tells you where the state of the season is for the Seattle Seahawks. But my biggest disappointment is that Seattle has not been able to run the football with any consistency, because if they could, I think this offense has top 5 potential. And there have been moments where we've seen flurries where they have put points on the board in an instant. We saw 14 points in the last 2 minutes in Sunday's game in the first half. I mean, that's what this offense is capable of, but you've got to have a semblance of a run game, and particularly in the short yardage situations. They have not been able to get a yard when they need to get a yard, and that has been really disappointing to watch. And you can blame them on some of the additions not working out, rookies not getting into the lineup. You can blame it on the lack of cohesion with 4 different right tackles playing snaps, whatever you want to blame it on. It has been really difficult to watch that. So I'm looking at the entire run game. The disappointment there, they have not been able to get that figured out and give some complimentary football, because I think Geno Smith's numbers, at least in touchdowns and interceptions, I think you would see a huge change in that regard if there was more of a running game and they could get more play action opportunities for him. Real quick, our last one here, and I feel like this one is pretty obvious because, well, nobody's really been playing, but top rookie on offense. I think you and I are probably going to be in agreement on that one.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to go with A.J. Barner for all the reasons that you talked about before. I think that he's been okay as a blocker, a little bit less than physical than I was expecting, but he has been very good in the receiving game. And I would echo what you just said as far as big disappointments. To me, one of my biggest concerns for the Seahawks is that when Ken Walker is a free agent a couple of years from now, are the Seahawks fans going to be feeling like New York Giants fans are feeling right now? Saquon Barkley and him leaving New York and then goes to Philadelphia and is becoming an absolute superstar, with some of the most dynamic plays you're ever going to see in a football field. That to me feels like what Ken Walker is capable of and has not yet become that. So I mentioned before that he is kind of the unheralded star in a way that, as you just said, Seattle's inability to get any kind of consistent ground game going. You can blame that on the play calling, blame that on the line, blame that on the running back, whoever. Seattle's inability to do that to me has been one of the most disappointing things. I had to make sure I threw that in there as well.
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like A.J. Barner's the top rookie just by default, because he has done a lot of positive things. But to an extent, it is by default because Christian Haynes didn't even dress this last game. Satoa Lamea hasn't played at all this year. Mike Jarrell's gotten 3 starts, but it's been pretty rough for him the last couple of games, and not taking anything away from him. He's doing the best that he can as a player that's going to take some time to develop to be able to play against NFL defenders. But A.J. Barner, by default, he's the only one that's really had consistent positives as a rookie on the offensive side of the football. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, we'll have our midseason superlatives on the defensive side of the football, and we'll take a look at where things stand in the NFC West race and zoom in on the 3 adversaries who will all be playing this upcoming weekend in Week 10. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and thanks for tuning in. Go Hawks.